In 632 CE, when Prophet Muhammad died, Islam controlled only the Arabian Peninsula. Scattered desert tribes most empires had never heard of. But watch this timeline. By 732 CE, exactly 100 years later, Islamic forces controlled territory from Spain to India, over 5 million square miles. To put that in perspective, Rome took 400 years to reach peak size. Alexander's empire collapsed at his death. The Mongols needed decades of preparation under Genghis Khan. But somehow, desert tribes simultaneously defeated the two greatest superpowers of their time, the Byzantine Empire and Persian Sassanid Empire, while conquering North Africa, Spain, and pushing into France. Your textbooks call it religious enthusiasm. Some claim superior tactics, others point to enemy weakness. But here's what they won't tell you. What I'm about to prove with historical evidence. This wasn't random expansion. This was the execution of the most sophisticated strategic pattern in history. It's so effective that once you see it, you'll recognize it in modern geopolitics today. Before we continue, let me establish something crucial. Everything you're about to see comes from peer-reviewed historical scholarship, primary sources, and archaeological evidence. We're not discussing conspiracy theories. We're analyzing documented strategic patterns that historians have studied for decades, but rarely present as a unified approach. I've analyzed works by leading Islamic historians. Hugh Kennedy's The Great Arab Conquests, Fred Donner's The Early Islamic Conquests, Walter Kagi's Byzantium and the Early Islamic Conquests, and Patricia Crone's Meccan Trade and the Rise of Islam. These aren't fringe theories. This is mainstream scholarship presented through the lens of strategic analysis. We'll examine Byzantine chronicles written during the conquests, Persian administrative records, Islamic historical accounts, and recent archaeological discoveries that reveal administrative continuity across conquered territories. The pattern that emerges is so clear, so methodical, that it fundamentally changes how we understand not just medieval history, but modern power dynamics. Here's the pattern they don't teach. Islamic expansion followed a precise three-phase strategic approach that was repeated across every theater of conquest. This wasn't conscious conspiracy. It was an emergent strategic logic so effective it became systematically replicated. While the Byzantine and Persian empires exhausted themselves in a devastating 26-year war, the Arabian Peninsula was undergoing the most rapid political unification in recorded history. Here's the key insight. This wasn't just military unification. It was the creation of a single command structure that could coordinate operations across thousands of miles, while their enemies fought with no coordination whatsoever. By 632 CE, Islam had established communication networks, supply routes, and allied tribal systems stretching from Yemen to Syria. Meanwhile, Byzantines faced Slavic invasions, Persian attacks, and internal religious conflicts. Persians dealt with Byzantine pressure, Turkish raids, and succession crises. But here's the sophisticated part. Islamic forces didn't just wait for enemy weakness. Historical records show Islamic diplomats offering separate peace deals to different Byzantine and Persian commanders, preventing unified responses. When Islamic armies conquered territory, they didn't follow traditional conquest models. Instead of imposing new languages, destroying institutions, or forcing conversions, they offered what we'd recognize today as a partnership framework. Byzantine tax collectors could keep their positions. They just sent revenue to Damascus instead of Constantinople. Local laws remained alongside Islamic law. Christian and Jewish communities practiced freely under protected status, paying jizya tax that was often lower than previous imperial taxation. This wasn't just tolerance, it was strategic scaling. Traditional conquest required massive garrison forces to control hostile populations. The Islamic model turned conquered territories into willing participants in their own administration. Look at Egypt. When Alexandria fell in 641 CE, existing trade networks weren't destroyed. They were redirected. Egyptian grain that fed Constantinople now fed Damascus. Egyptian taxes that funded Byzantine armies now funded Islamic expansion. The most brilliant aspect was economic. Islamic expansion wasn't random. It systematically targeted every major trade route between Europe and Asia. Syria controlled land routes from Asia to Europe. Egypt controlled Mediterranean trade. Persia controlled the Silk Road. Central Asian conquests controlled the spice trade. Result: Europe was systematically cut off from Asian luxury goods that had been the foundation of Byzantine wealth. This is why Europe entered the Dark Ages, not just political collapse, but economic isolation from global trade networks. While European kingdoms struggled with limited trade, Islamic cities like Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba became the wealthiest, most advanced urban centers in the world. But if this pattern was so clear, why isn't it taught this way? The answer lies in who wrote the histories we inherited. Most Western education about this period derives from European sources written centuries later. During the Crusades, when Christian kingdoms were attempting to reconquer lost territories, these sources had clear incentives to portray Islamic expansion as chaotic and religiously fanatical. But contemporary sources tell a different story. The Saracens do not force our people to abandon their customs, but allow our governors to remain in their positions, asking only for tribute. The Arab commanders understand our administrative systems better than our own officials, and have kept the grain shipments flowing more efficiently than under the previous government. Recent excavations of 7th-8th century Islamic administrative centers reveal Byzantine coins, Persian administrative seals, and local religious artifacts all used simultaneously. This isn't cultural destruction, it's systematic integration. The most compelling evidence for strategic coordination. The timing. 636 CE, while Khalid ibn al-Walid defeated Byzantines at Yarmouk in Syria, other Islamic forces simultaneously attacked Persian positions in Iraq, conducted naval operations in the eastern Mediterranean, and negotiated with Coptic Christians in Egypt. This level of coordination across thousands of miles, with 7th century communication technology, requires central planning. Pre-positioned supply depots, water sources, and intelligence networks were established months before armies arrived. This strategic pattern, divide enemies, offer partnership over conquest, control economic choke points, is being executed by modern powers today. China isn't conquering territories militarily. They offer infrastructure partnerships to developing countries, ports, railways, communication networks, while maintaining control of strategic positions. Islamic forces offered administrative partnerships while controlling trade routes. China offers development partnerships while controlling key infrastructure. The strategic logic is identical. The United States didn't directly conquer Western Europe. Instead, they offered security partnerships and economic integration. NATO countries kept their governments and cultures, but American bases controlled strategic positions, and the dollar controlled international trade. Even tech companies use this model. Google doesn't force adoption. They make services so integrated you choose them. They don't control your devices. They control information flow.
Guidance.
Partnership over conquest, controlling the essential infrastructure. To understand why this pattern was so effective, we must examine the world it emerged into. The 7th century was a perfect storm of imperial exhaustion. The Byzantine-Sassanid War of 6026-28 CEE wasn't a border conflict. It was total war that bled both empires dry. Byzantines won, but were financially ruined, militarily depleted, and facing internal religious schisms that alienated key provinces like Egypt and Syria. The Sassanid Empire fared worse. King Khosrow II was overthrown and executed. Civil war followed, fragmenting the empire into competing factions with shattered military capabilities. Meanwhile, the Arabian Peninsula, dismissed by great powers as irrelevant desert tribes, was undergoing unprecedented unification under a new ideological framework that transcended traditional tribal loyalties. While ancient empires fragmented under internal pressure, a new unified force was emerging in the periphery, ready to exploit the power vacuum with unprecedented strategic sophistication. What happened next proves this wasn't lucky timing or religious fervor. It was the systematic evolution of a strategic blueprint that would reshape global civilization for 600 years. Each successive dynasty didn't just maintain conquests. They refined the pattern, adapting it for different challenges and opportunities. Tonight, we decode how this pattern matured into something unprecedented. A civilization-wide operating system that dominated world trade, accumulated global knowledge, and systematically undermined European power for 6 centuries. While Europe fragmented into warring feudal states, Islamic powers systematically evolved their approach, creating the world's first truly global strategic network. The Umayyads didn't abandon the original pattern, they perfected it. By controlling both land routes and sea lanes, they could dictate terms to any power dependent on long-distance trade. Moving the capital from Medina to Damascus wasn't just geographic repositioning, it was strategic genius. Moving the capital to Baghdad, custom-built at the intersection of Asian trade routes, was unjust symbolic. It was the creation of the world's first truly global economic and intellectual hub. Goods, ideas, and wealth flowed freely across this vast domain, but always through Islamic-controlled channels. And Chinese knowledge, while European monasteries struggled to maintain basic literacy. Algebra, advanced astronomy, surgical techniques, architectural innovations. These were unaccidents but systematic research programs funded by trade wealth and designed to maintain strategic advantages. This wasn't cultural curiosity, it was strategic resource accumulation. Damascus sat at the crossroads of existing Byzantine trade and communication networks, allowing them to cope rather than replace existing infrastructure. Instead of replacing Byzantine systems entirely, they created parallel structures. Greek remained administrative language in former Byzantine territories, Arabic in former Persian lands, Coptic in Egypt. Any power seeking to advance had to engage with, and inevitably enrich, Islamic centers of learning. Local rulers found themselves economically dependent on Islamic networks without realizing they'd lost strategic autonomy. This wasn't cultural preservation, it was strategic efficiency that minimized resistance while maximizing control. But here's the crucial evolution: maritime power. The Umayyads built the Islamic world's first major navy, not for random raiding, but to complete the economic strangulation strategy. Despite initial military successes, Crusader states remained isolated outposts, constantly dependent on European support and never dismantling the underlying Islamic economic networks. Cut off from global trade, intellectually stunted, and economically backward, European powers launched military expeditions to reclaim access to Asian wealth. Islamic forces didn't invade. They were invited by one faction in a civil war. These projects create economic dependencies through debt arrangements and long-term leases on strategic assets: ports, railways, communication networks. The strategic logic is identical, adapted for modern conditions. When European scholars wanted to read Aristotle, Euclid, or advanced medical texts, they had to travel to Cordoba or Toledo and learn Arabic. The strategic logic is identical, adapted for modern conditions. It's the same logic. Exploit divisions, offer attractive partnerships, control essential infrastructure, accumulate intellectual resources, dominates current geopolitical competition. They inadvertently enriched Islamic merchants by creating new demand for goods and services. Powers that dominate these choke points can dictate terms to competitors without direct conquest. The same geographic and economic logic that drove medieval Islamic expansion shapes contemporary strategic competition. This created systematic intellectual dependency that reinforced economic and political control. Intellectual dominance compounds over generations, providing sustained strategic advantages. Understanding these patterns isn't just historical education, it's strategic intelligence for navigating our changing world. If this analysis opened your eyes to hidden patterns in current events, subscribe for more decoded strategies from history's greatest powers. Islamic powers achieved something unprecedented, a civilizational advantage that lasted longer than most empires existed. Once established, they implemented the full strategic framework with unprecedented sophistication. The blueprint continues. The question is, will you recognize it when you see it? Their administrative approach reveals sophisticated strategic thinking. The countries and corporations that master this approach will dominate the next century, and libraries containing 400,000 volumes. While London remained a muddy village, and the largest Christian European library held 600 books. This wasn't just cultural flourishing, it was strategic positioning. The result? While European kingdoms struggled with local, barter-based economies. The Umayyad Caliphate created a unified economic zone stretching from the Atlantic to Central Asia. The Abbasid Revolution in 750 CE marked the pattern's ultimate evolution. The Abbasids added a fourth phase to the strategic pattern: intellectual dominance. Islamic scholars didn't just preserve ancient knowledge, they advanced it. By controlling both trade routes and intellectual networks, the Islamic world became indispensable to global commerce and innovation. Let us examine how this evolved pattern worked in practice through two crucial examples: Al-Andalus and the Indian Ocean strategy. The conquest of Visigothic Spain in 711 CE reveals the pattern's adaptability. Cordoba became a city of 500,000 people with street lighting, public baths. Al-Andalus became Europe's intellectual gateway to the ancient world. Perhaps the most sophisticated application was maritime. Islamic traders did in conquer Indian Ocean territories. They established trading posts and diplomatic relationships that gradually created economic dependencies. By understanding monsoon patterns better than local rulers and providing superior financial services, Islamic merchants became indispensable to regional trade. This is identical to how modern tech platforms operate. They don't conquer users. They make themselves indispensable to daily operations until alternatives become impractical. The Crusades, often portrayed as religious holy war, can be decoded as Europe's desperate attempt to break this 600-year strategic stranglehold. But by then, the strategic blueprint was too deeply embedded. The Crusades ultimately highlighted Europe's continued weakness and desperate need for wealth and knowledge that remained concentrated in the Islamic world. This 600-year Islamic strategic pattern is an historical curiosity. It's the blueprint being executed by rising powers today. China's approach follows the identical pattern. Instead of military conquest, they offer infrastructure partnerships to developing countries. Just as Islamic powers offered administrative partnerships while controlling trade routes, China offers development partnerships while controlling essential infrastructure. Just as Islamic powers offered administrative partnerships while controlling trade routes, China offers development partnerships while controlling essential infrastructure. Once you recognize this pattern, you see it everywhere. Partnership over conquest, infrastructure control over territorial occupation, economic dependency over political subjugation. Understanding this pattern allows us to predict how current geopolitical competition will evolve. Modern equivalents of medieval trade routes, semiconductor supply chains, rare earth elements, internet backbone infrastructure serve identical strategic functions. Just as Islamic powers accumulated intellectual resources during European Dark Ages, current powers compete to dominate artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and biotechnology research. The 600-year Islamic strategic blueprint reveals a fundamental truth about power. Sustainable dominance comes not from conquest, but from making yourself indispensable. By exploiting competitor divisions, offering attractive partnerships, controlling essential infrastructure, and accumulating intellectual resources. This pattern is being executed today by powers who understand that military conquest is obsolete, but strategic positioning is eternal. We're witnessing the same strategic competition that shaped the medieval world, played out with modern tools but following ancient logic. This is Dynasty Decoded, where we reveal the strategies that shape history and predict the future. Comment below. Which modern power do you think is executing this pattern most effectively?